Mistreatment is an unfortunate reality that many face, often leaving deep scars and impacting lives in profound ways. But how are we supposed to respond to mistreatment and hurt according to the Bible? We set out to answer this difficult question. In the process, we were inspired by the story of Charles W. David Jr., an African-American Coast Guard member who faced racial discrimination and mistreatment during World War II. Ultimately, you will see his response to his mistreatment is an example to us all. If you want more information about Charles's life, see the links in the description. Now you need to hear the start to Charles W. David Jr.'s story. During World War II, Charles W. David Jr. faced extreme racial discrimination, which limited his role in the Coast Guard, despite clear intelligence and great motivation to serve his country with all he had. He was assigned only to menial tasks like serving food and coffee, and all this solely due to his race and nothing he did wrong. It was also impossible for him to be promoted or serve on the front lines as he greatly desired. Instead, he was trapped in this role, far beneath his capabilities in the Coast Guard, one of the most useless branches of the military. On this boat, he constantly endured racial slurs, rough treatment, and derogatory comments on a daily basis from his fellow sailors. Mistreated without any fault of his own, Charles's story reflects the systemic racism prevalent during that time. What Charles went through raises the question, how should he deal with it? And maybe a better question is, how would you deal with the same mistreatment in your life? Because mistreatment is a universal aspect of humanity that happens to each and every one of us at one time or another, and not only because of your race or sex. All people everywhere have had to deal with some level of unfair treatment, from the youngest child to oldest adult. We are going to come back to Charles David's powerful story in a bit, but here are some examples of how you can be mistreated. People can be mistreated due to skin color, ethnic background, or nationality. Just like Charles David's mistreatment was solely based on the color of his skin, mistreatment can also occur due to envy, where people harbor a dislike for others' talents or possessions. Remember Joseph in Genesis chapter 37 faced mistreatment from his brothers out of envy because of his father's love and trust through no fault of his own. His brothers hated him so much that they sold him into slavery and pretended he was dead. Mistreatment can arise even when one is trying to be a blessing in the ministry that God has given you to do. In 1 Samuel 23, David saved the city of Keilah from the Philistines at the command of God, but soon faced betrayal from those very same people when King Saul showed up a few days later. Sometimes in the ministry, those that we help the most do us the most harm. How have you been mistreated in your life? Take a moment and reflect on that. Let's next look at how we should not respond to mistreatment. First, you must take heed not to let mistreatment change your character and start making decisions that lead into bitterness and unforgiveness. According to Hebrews 12:15, bitterness is a dangerous emotion that will lead to defilement in your life. If you hang on to the anger, it will stain your entire life, and you can end up being defined by what happened to you, not who you are. It can also cloud your vision, and you can no longer see people clearly and attach false motives to those around you that are not the true motives of their heart. Next, you need to choose the correct response. There are many potential responses to mistreatment, but let's focus on the most typical response. In the natural, we usually first seek revenge, which leads to a cycle of hurt and can even end in physical violence. We see a great picture of this in the Old Testament in 1 Samuel chapter 25, where David was mistreated by Nabal. David had spent all spring protecting this man's flocks and herds, and in those times there was expected to be some form of reward for this very valuable service. But Nabal despised him and called David a rebel, mistreating him with full-on contempt and lies. David's immediate reaction to this was bad, and he prepared to destroy Nabal and all of his servants and possessions, but he was stopped on the way by Nabal's wife Abigail, who showed him how it would alter his whole life and ultimately hurt him when he became king. So we too must also learn from Abigail's words in our lives and not seek revenge for our mistreatment. So that was one way that David reacted poorly to mistreatment. Now let's see the time he got it right. Remember the story we mentioned earlier in 1 Samuel 23 with the people of Keilah? This is actually where David got it right. Remember, David had risked his life to save these people's lives from certain death. the Philistines would have destroyed the whole city and left no one alive. God had even told David to go and help this city, and King Saul did not help them, which was his job. Now, after all this, David hears that Saul is on his way to get him. He asks God if they will betray him. He gets the answer, yes, they will betray you into Saul's hands. So what does David do this time? First, he invited God's perspective by asking him what he should do, and God answered what his next steps should be. This teaches us that we should always seek God's opinion first before reacting emotionally to any mistreatment. Second, he did what God told him to do, and that was to just move on. He did not let mistreatment define his identity. He moved on physically and spiritually and did not hurt anyone on his way out. Lastly, David chose to serve. In the end, he became king over all of Israel, and not only do we not see him calling for revenge on the city, but it was his ministry to serve and protect the people of Keilah, even when they had mistreated him. So the principle for us to learn from this is we should also seek to serve people after receiving mistreatment. However, it is not always possible to serve those who have mistreated us specifically, but the idea is to not let it stop us from serving other people. Continue in the ministry that God has called you to, regardless of what people have done to you in the past. Now let's go back to the story of Charles W. David Jr. Charles W. David Jr.'s is a great modern-day example that shows how to overcome mistreatment and leave a positive legacy. When a German U-boat torpedoed his boat, the USS Dorchester, in a freezing cold winter, as it was sinking, Charles W. David Jr. worked tirelessly for many hours with the help of a few others to rescue the sailors that used to torment him, but were now too frozen to climb to safety from the lifeboats. Eventually, Charles was credited with saving the lives of 93 sailors, but this came at the cost of his own life. He gave his life dying of pneumonia contracted from his valiant efforts just a few weeks after the events. This is a picture of his widow and son receiving the Coast Guard's highest medal in his stead. Reflecting on all this, a compelling call beckons, the invitation to shape your destiny and transcend mistreatment. Life's journey presents challenges, and the power lies in our responses and choices. In the face of mistreatment, the dangers of bitterness and revenge loom large. Bitterness clouds judgment and taints interactions, and revenge perpetuates negativity. Steer clear of bitterness by releasing its grip and allowing room for personal growth. Choose not to be defined by mistreatment. Instead, move on both physically and spiritually. Embrace the transformative power of serving others, even those who may have wronged you. Charles W. David Jr.'s life exemplifies resilience, reminding us that by making choices aligned with positivity, forgiveness, and personal growth, we can shape a legacy that inspires others to rise above their circumstances. The time is now to craft a cheerful ending, a deliberate choice to triumph over adversity, build bridges, embrace personal growth, and navigate life's challenges with resilience. Let us follow his great example and keep up the good fight. Amen.